He's Jack,
He's Jace.
and we're gonna ramble for another 10 minutes.
About villains. And specifically, those that really get under the skin.
Play with your head a little bit.
That's it, yeah. So, in our preamble, we both came up with somebody that we thought was a really interesting case study. And Jace, would you like to tell us who your member of this particular rogues gallery is?
You wound me by making me go first. But yes, I had meandered through a couple of ideas. I first was going to mention Monica. Decided no, too hard to do. Too much into the meta, as it were. You'd have to start connecting your game stories between dimensions and stuff like that for it to really work out. And depending on your scenario, that may work. But I went a little bit more focused and chose the titular monster, as it were, the Babadook from, well, the Babadook.
Which is a great film from 2014, if memory serves. If you haven't seen it and you fancy watching something that's a good modern horror film, can't go far wrong with it.
Yeah. The premise behind it is this monster is essentially a manifestation of grief. Oh, sorry. Maybe I should have started with spoiler warnings.
Spoiler warning. Consider this going forward. We'll be including spoilers for two films, so both The Babadook and Pan's Labyrinth. So going forward, if you haven't seen any of those and you want to watch them, go and watch something else. We've got a whole channel of great videos you can check out.
Yeah, exactly. But to continue on, it is a manifestation of the mother's grief. It starts off very simply with a book called Mr. Babadook. And this book details the adventures of Mr. Babadook. I use the terms adventures lightly. The child becomes somewhat obsessed with the idea. The mother is constantly trying to reassure him that it's just a book and tries to dispose of the book. Slowly, things start to escalate. Your typical haunting story, as it were. Doors start slamming. And it all leads up to the constant denial that this creature exists is actually giving it more and more power. It's the idea that the more you try to repress your feelings, the stronger they tend to get, because you have feelings because they need to be met. By constantly denying it, you're denying yourself the outlet. So having a villain that feeds upon the fears or grief of your players might sound like a recipe for players crying in the corner, but let me tell you, players actually want to end up crying in the corner. That's why we join TTRPGs, is a lot of us want to feel something outside of the day-to-day life.
Absolutely, and it's creating that threat. But players will be players. So the question is also how to go about building that entity, which is in a way that prevents your players from just running into the room and rolling initiative.
Well, in this case, the Babadook is immaterial for, like 90% of the movie? And when it does materialize, it materializes only to take possessions, actually, of the mother and have her start acting. For those that don't like animal abuse, she does kill the, I think it's the dog in the movie.
I think so.
She like breaks its neck or something while going after the child, which she feels like her child is somewhat responsible for her grief at that moment because she has had so many sleepless nights because of the child. She's not quite all there to begin with, and then once the Babadook takes control, it just amplifies everything.
Yeah, of course, and the child himself as well. He's quite troubled. This is obviously, these kind of ideas are things that you can incorporate. Obviously, talk to your group beforehand, because child psychology is obviously quite a deep and potentially triggering theme, but it's something that the Babadook itself as a film, and bearing in mind when you're working from a script, it's a very different story.
Oh yeah.
But it's something that the film actually handles with the deftness that's required for that. So
and with all things that we talk about, this is something that should somewhat be discussed in a session 0.
So moving on to a much more human threat, and as I mentioned earlier, spoilers for Pan's Labyrinth follow. And to anyone that hasn't seen it, it's a film that blurs the line between fantasy and reality. And the primary threat, there's obviously the kind of the very distinct visuals of the what's called the Pale Man, with the very spindly figure who has the eyes in the palm of his hands. That's the one. And you've got things like that which are very, very creepy and very distinctly utilized by Guillermo del Toro in multiple productions he's done. Wonderful, wonderful visuals. But the real antagonist, and the one that gets under your skin, is Captain Vidal, who is the operations chief of a small Spanish village, which is seeing off the Spanish resistance during Franco's takeover of Spain. And from that kind of character, you've got somebody who is very decided in his ambitions. He's loyal to General Franco to a fault, and in a very early scene, bludgeons a farmer and his son to death for being on their land before their bag is searched and they find 2 dead rabbits, and the farmer and his son were legitimately out hunting, which is the reason they give, but not before they've lost their lives to Vidal. And it's that kind of character. You've got somebody who's brutal, who is in a very isolated situation where he is in control and there's no disputing. And again, something in your games that you can utilize here is that figure of who is surrounded by loyalists, of other soldiers. Your heroes are outnumbered, and especially in Pan's Labyrinth, there's Ophelia, the little girl who tells the main story, and Mercedes, who's a cook and a general housekeeper. And it's the two of them who really are the only thing that's between the larger story and Vidal. These two people who are traditionally considered helpless, and actually how things work out from there. But for your games, again, using somebody who is surrounded by loyalists, who has got a retinue, and very early on kind of using that brutality and disregard for human life, or any life, as a means to establish that kind of character. And then from there, you can get steadily more and more unhinged as he almost kind of hits this point of being delusional in the cause that he's supposedly fighting for, and believing that whatever happens is justified by the successful takedown of this guerrilla rebel warband that exists up in the forests. So, Jason, anything?
big question I would ask here is what makes him psychological rather than just power hungry? He does seem to stand very close to that line, at least from what I'm hearing.
Oh, absolutely. He's also got the relationship with Ophelia, the girl who lives in this semi-fantastical world, that he is her stepfather and the father to her mother's son, who she's carrying when the film begins. And it's not just this demanding and commanding presence. It's also that after a while, and we're going to go into spoilers for Pan's Labyrinth, that after Ophelia's mother dies, in giving birth to her son, Captain Vidal then becomes Ophelia's only surviving family. And you could argue a case for that it was the child that killed the mother, and therefore Captain Vidal is somehow responsible for that. You're going into a whole philosophy of writing and character development, or is it a tragic accident that unfortunately at the time was all too common? And it becomes then that once you have that relationship established, that there's a almost pathological dislike of Ophelia because she is not his child, whereas her half-brother is.
Mm-hmm.
It's then becomes much more of a controlling relationship, and the same with Mercedes, the cook and housekeeper, that he is technically her employer, and that's obviously a very in most relationships that's a very superficial one.
Yeah.
But this is such a remote village that it's not just somebody that you see for 9 to 5 and you have a bit of a dislike for them, but you acknowledge them politely, and then you go home and you forget they exist. This is somebody you live in the same house with. They're always there. There's always the threat of that kind of presence, and with a garrison of guards, guns, and control of food and supplies and medicine and anything that you might need, with the keys belonging solely to this one character, he's then got that position where he's in control of not just everybody's employment and everybody's involvement, but their entire lives. Anything they could ever need or want has to go through him.
He's Jack.
He's Jace.
And next time we'll go ahead and talk about some other types of villains.
And we will see you then.